Dr. Alana Coffey, and welcome to another Bamboo and Tea with Dr. Alana Coffey. This is an interview with a very special woman that I'll introduce in just a moment, but first I wanted to let you know that when you interview outside like we're doing, there is ambient personality, shall we call it. And that could be a rooster, a chicken, an airplane, a dog, anything could happen. We're outside because we're continuing to be healthy and socially distanced so that we can actually have a comfortable conversation without masks and being able to look at each other. So thank you for your patience with that. My guest today is Emily Makahi, social worker, master's degree, and so much more. This woman has done so much. And, you know, I'm just going to introduce her and start talking to you right now, Emily, because I came to meet you just in a really kind of a casual way. And every time I meet you, I learn something more. And then finally I said, can you just send me your CV? That I didn't have enough printer paper in my printer to print out your whole CV. It's like 9 pages long and it's not full of fluff. Everything in that, it really exemplifies and shows a wonderful body of work. Here in Hawaii, you have been all over the place. You've worked as an artist, you've worked as an educator, as a trainer, and you know, right now you're working towards therapy hours and a doctorate in public health. There's just so much to you, and I'm really honored and humbled because you never said anything. And if I was you, I'd have been like, have you read my resume? But you're so humble, you would never say anything like that. So welcome and thank you to this interview and this conversation.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for having me and being able to not only share my mo'olelo, but I think the mo'olelo of my kupuna and aumakua and all those who've come before me. So thank you.
And that's what it was. So we were doing this workshop together and this woman did it in 2 languages. So you would speak Hawaiian word and then you would very effortlessly give the English translation. And you did that for the whole presentation. It was so beautiful. And that presentation was on Pono practice. And you know, at some point in this interview, I really want you to talk about that because I think that Pono practice everyone could benefit from that mana'o, from that knowledge. It reached my na'au when you were talking about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, let's just do that workshop. And it was just so useful, and it was operational. It wasn't just words and concepts. It was like, what can you actually do to bring balance and health into your life? So it was a wonderful seminar.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I've been afforded the opportunity to learn ho'oponopono from Auntie Lynette and Uncle Likeke Paglinawan, who learned Tutu Puku'i style of ho'oponopono. And they have been my mentors in not only how to become a practitioner of Native Hawaiian healing, but how to just be a good human. And I think that along with their teachings and the teachings of my family, this was a perfect setup for me to have the opportunity to be a healer within my community. And so Pono practice, becoming a social worker, all of these things are just in line with not just my vision for myself, but I really think this inherited vision that I've gained from my family. And all of, like I said, all of those aumakua and kupuna that have gifted me the skills, to be honest.
You know, you always pay tribute, and that is something that I recognize, you know, whether we're in a meeting or in that seminar, you pay tribute, and I think that's important. You know, when we do Western psychology, we pay tribute to, oh, I studied under so-and-so, and, you know, this was my mentor. And so one of the things that you do is you weave, you know, Native Hawaiian practices with Western psychology so beautifully. You pay tribute, and we do too. And I think it's important actually for people to know who you studied with and how you studied, right?
And I think it's important, not just where I've studied, but also when working with individuals, so they know who is coming with me to the session as well. And so hopefully they can also feel the mana, or this supernatural type of power that comes from my mentors, my family members, and then they are bringing their own set of mana and skills as well. And, you know, on this other level, it's kind of like this big party that our families get to have together, where we're just kind of joining these forces together for healing.
Right, right. So you don't lose any of the wisdom throughout the generations, right? It gets transmitted. And, you know, when I first conceived of the bamboo and tea interviews, you know, it was about bamboo. It, to me, is a very strong product, but very flexible. And tea is, you know, across the globe, people drink tea to calm and take time with each other. But, you know, I think having that, capturing the oral history is what I had really hoped to do, and have it someplace. Like, you know, let's talk story and have a conversation. So some of these things just don't get lost. And we need to keep talking, because some cultures don't write as much. We talk and we teach verbally. So thank you for doing this, because this is part of capturing the oral history.
Absolutely. And I really do believe that, I mean, Native Hawaiian culture and being kanaka maoli, we are an oral tradition, right? Nothing's necessarily written down. We have the tools today, and I really want to be able to value the tools and the opportunities we have today to be able to capture those things. And like you said, using and weaving Western thoughts as well, I think can only be advantageous for us and for those who experience things differently, experience culture much differently today than perhaps our ancestors have done in the past. And so just providing all of that opportunity. And I love that you brought in ohe, or bamboo, in that sense, right? Because even within our culture, ohe was used both as a tool of ku and hina, I guess, in a sense of balance, of a very masculine tool that is used to cut spirits and be able to use it as a sharp tool for cutting, and but also hina, in that it's soft outside is also approachable, and it's this beautiful dynamic. And so I love that, you know, bamboo and tea is also something that can be very culturally relevant to Hawaii.
It's amazing. You know, when I researched it, so many cultures use bamboo, so many different ways. And like even here in Hawaii, we share, there's so many people here, but the kadomatsus at the beginning of the year, excuse me, New Year's, the 3 kadomatsu, and it's cut, and basically that was a water vessel to put out fire. I mean, there's just so many uses to that. When we think about, you know, natural products too, you know, I just think, well, maybe we should all be growing a little bit of extra bamboo around. So
absolutely, yeah, it's a beautiful sentiment to, I think, be able to. And I think you talked about it earlier, having this construct that is above us as to what is the main use of bamboo, but also Native Hawaiian healing, and then bringing it down to the level that makes sense to you as an individual. And so, and that's what that I think is my kuleana responsibility, has been, how do I create these constructs and these pathways for an individual to get the most use out of it for themselves.
So let's talk about, I just want to ask, you know, I can imagine what inspires you, but would you speak to it, please? Yeah, what got you started?
So I became a social worker.
Salt of the earth.
Yeah.
Best people on the planet.
But yes. But I became a social worker. It's a very, and I openly share it to a lot of my students, because I also teach at the University of Hawaiʻi. I began my social work journey really as an individual who suffered loss. And my father passed away when I was 16 years old, and he was a very young age of 62. And at that moment, I was really angry at these belief systems that I had that could take away someone so important to me. And instead of being angry, you know, that you can be like for the rest of my life, I actually turned it into this opportunity. I didn't want to see other 16-year-old girls lose their father or not have protective factors in place. And especially my dad being kanaka maoli, or Native Hawaiian, I thought we could have done so much more as a family to protect him and his health. But instead, we let it be his own thing. Like, oh, you're sick? Okay, well, you got to take care of yourself. And so there was just so many things that I felt like I also stood as this healer, even though I was only 16 and I'm the youngest child. I just felt like there's something that I was doing to kind of hold my family together at that moment. And so I went to school to become a social worker. I became a health social worker, and I began my career in the Native Hawaiian healthcare systems and doing diabetes education and doing chronic disease management programs. And it was really, again, to protect a community that I felt maybe I wasn't protected at that time when I was 16, but it was my kuleana, it was my responsibility to protect others from the same story.
And so I think that's what I mean about the social workers. It's almost like you know, the social workers that I know have found a need in the community or the system, and they sort of gravitate to, like, you know, almost like shoring up a dam. They're like, I'm going to patch that. I can do that piece. But, you know, thank you so much for sharing that very personal story. You were so very young and a baby.
I didn't think about it at that time, really. You know, I was just thinking I just wanted my family to be okay. I wanted my sisters to be okay. I wanted my nieces and nephews to heal in a way that made sense to them, but also bringing back together this idea that grief and loss was just a very real thing, and we weren't really talking about it at that time. And unless you've experienced it, you're not going to know how to express it in a healthy way. And so for me, again, going back to school and becoming a social worker was, I wanted to learn for myself. First of all, how do I do this for myself? How do I do this as a steward of knowledge for my own family? And then how do I do this at a community level, you know, so that we can create thriving families in our Lahui or our Native Hawaiian communities.
So, you know, it reminds me of, like, when we take care of things, this is one of my favorite social ecology is, you know, we take care of our individual selves, our family, our community, or, you know, it goes infinitum and even historically, right? So, you know, it started with your home, taking care of you and your family. Now you're also getting a PhD in public health. So, you know, that pushes it out to not just your family and community, but actually, you know, nationally even. So can you speak a little bit about that?
No, I love that you brought in that socio-ecological model, because that's something that is continuous in our practice. And I do think that a lot of Western teachings kind of limit you, and you have to stick to one part of it, right? So here you're going to learn individual work, and you're going to become an expert, and you'll stay there forever. Or you're going to learn macro social work and work in policies and systems. But then everything in between, it's not necessarily something taught, but it's absolutely needed, right? We know that it's needed, but we kind of overlook some of those things. So for me, that idea of wanting to be everything. I wanted to be everything that I could be, and also wanting to impact each phase of existence, really, for individuals. So to do the individual work, but also to get a PhD in public health studies, so that I could also impact change. And you know, we always talk about kanaka maoli in Hawaii being the most resilient individuals from historical colonization to, you know, current social determinants of health. But why do we have to be resilient when these systems were created to continue to oppress us? Or we need to start changing those systems. And so for me, the PhD in public health studies was to impact change on that level.
Yes.
And if I can bring up other Native Hawaiian wahine in the process of that they are valuable and worth a PhD, then I'm also going to do that as well. And so
I have chicken skin, you can't see it, but I do have it. And I think, you know, along the PhD path that my journey was very similar in that I felt that this degree that I was pursuing wasn't just mine, but it was for women. It was for women of color. I kept my grandfather's name because I thought he had a piece in it. You know, the opportunities that we have is not just personal, it's for our community, our brothers and sisters, and that's the push out, right? So it's inspiring, and I think that one of the reasons why I wanted to interview you and share this interview with so many people is because there's a little girl out there, maybe even a little boy out there, who's going to look at, you know, Emily and go, oh, really, me too, I can do that.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, the University of Hawaiʻi where I'm attending, you know, they claim this indigenous place of learning and of knowledge. And unless you have indigenous people there, it's not going to be that. So we need to kind of create those pathways for our indigenous people to not only obtain, but also be able to teach. And I think with the PhD also, if I can speak a little bit plainly, that what I'm most proud of as well is also choosing a topic that is primarily kanaka and not something that is Western, because Western would have been easy and Western would have gotten me my PhD in 3 years.
Right.
And I decided that it was more important for me to, like you said, honor my kupuna by studying mana and Native Hawaiian spirituality as a means to wellness versus doing a secondary data analysis that would have gotten me through the program really quickly, right? Is I wanted to honor all those who have paved the path for me to be able to be at that table as well.
So even that you're speaking to that, let me just kind of pull my thoughts together here for a second, because I think it was Edward Said wrote a book way back in the day, Orientalism, and he brings up the point that no matter where you come from and you go to school under the guise of Western education, even if you study your own culture, but it goes through that lens of Western, it changes the outcome. So somehow, you know, being able to study what you're studying, kanaka maoli, and have it be, I think you said kanaka, and not Western, that is such progress, because you couldn't have done that maybe 20, 30 years ago, because they would have said, oh no, it has to be, you know, a regressive model or some such thing. So just that you can even change the way it's studied.
Absolutely.
You can change the language around it. There's someone, you know, that's out of the box up at UH actually allowing even that to happen. I mean, that's forward thinking already. So who are your advisors? Yeah.
You know, I will say I'm also really proud that 4 out of my committee members are Native Hawaiian faculty at the University of Hawaiʻi, and a Native Hawaiian PhD in our community, which is actually the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, my community member. But that was a goal of mine, was that to predominantly have a very kanaka-filled committee. But there's also, you know, there's balance in that too, because they also expect more from me as well, right? Being kanaka. And so I think getting a degree that is kanaka focused also has the kuleana and the weight of, is this also accepted by my community? And that is first and foremost who I'm trying to convince that I am worthy of this knowledge. Right? And then if I can get a PhD in the process, then that would be great.
How's your priorities? You go, girl. Unapologetic. I love it. I love it.
And I think, you know, even on that unapologetic scale of, you know, they talk about this idea of if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that has been something that I think a lot of our, not just Kanaka, but indigenous folks, and a lot of our Pacific Islander cousins, like, we've been on the menu for so long, in a sense of we've been researched, we've been tallied as statistical like measures of why we can't get this and this. You know, we've been everyone's data, but we haven't been the ones researching ourselves. We haven't been the ones creating interventions. We haven't been the ones that have really been the leaders and the experts of our own people for so long. So, and I could not have done this without a lot of my advisors who are on my committee, who have, like you said, who have done this work 20 years ago and allowed, you know, this little Eva Beach girl, like, the opportunity to even think that graduate school is an opportunity, and then to think a PhD of all things, like, I would never have thought about that, you know, going back to that 16-year-old girl who lost her dad, like, that was not on my radar at all.
Wow. You know, when you talk about we've been other people's data, it's what I'm hoping actually will happen is that with that data, somebody's making a narrative, right? Somebody's making an interpretation, and they're packaging it and saying, this is what that means. So as So what I'm hoping that you will do is not be anyone's data, but also be in charge of the narrative.
Yeah.
Right? So not let somebody else tell you about you, but you tell you about you.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I love that idea, right, of us telling our own story.
Yeah.
And like you said, we predominantly currently live in a culture that is a written history, right? So if it's not written, if it's not in a textbook, it didn't happen. But our culture and our histories aren't like that. And so we're just not necessarily catching up. We're just being able to play the game and be also, but also be true to who we are. And I think that's such a beautiful sentiment. And I think that's also why I've moved across, like you talked earlier about the CV of mine, which is, it is kind of crazy, and I can attest to that, but it does move from individual work to, you know, currently I'm the Deputy Principal Investigator at Wahine Coast Comprehensive Health Center. And I know it's a mouthful, but I absolutely love this position because how many times have we seen, you know, principal investigators of federal research being Native Hawaiian? Like, we just don't see it.
Right.
And so this is a step for, again, not only me, but for our communities to be experts in research and experts in what research is being conducted on us, but also like with us, right? Like we should absolutely be there. And not just second, third author, if anyone knows this idea of like publication, but we are first author.
Yeah.
We are first author skilled.
Wow.
Absolutely.
You know, not that it needs to be said, but I think when African Americans start talking about their experience, other people go, oh my gosh, that means that I don't have one too. It's like, no, we're talking about our experience and you can talk about yours too. But that's not what necessarily needs to be said, but I'm going to say it anyway. For the people who are listening, who are like, wait, I'm not in her story. I'm not part of what Emily is talking about. They don't have to be part of your story because you're telling your story.
Yeah.
And that's enough. And everybody gets to tell their story. And once all of our stories are told, then we lay it all out on the buffet table and we all go eat together.
Yeah.
But you get to just tell your story without caveat, without disclaimers or just, you know, you can just say it. And I love, that's what I meant when I said unapologetic.
Yeah.
Right.
And I love that you brought that point in because that has been something that always comes up. Like, well, I'm not Kanaka, I'm not this, and you don't have to be. And so, and like you said, unapologetically, my practice of social work, but first is Native Hawaiian healing methods. The reason why I bring so much attention to it is because we also are in Hawaii. Like, we have access to tools that nowhere else in the world has, right? Like, we're sitting here today and you know, ʻualakaʻa, like in ʻualakaʻa, and I think I might have just heard a rolling sweet potato. But we get to experience health and wellness from our first kumu, which is our aina. And so if I took that message anywhere else, it would just be a message. Where it's here, we get to experience it.
It's for real.
And so why not? Even if you don't feel this sense of belonging within the Kanaka, our aina allows you to belong. Right, so everyone gets to have that, and I want to honor, you know, we're in somewhat of like the Mānoa area. Like, I want to honor Kahala Opuna, and I want to honor all of those ancestors that have come here and created this space for us, this malu of sorts, right? This safe space for us to heal, to learn, to do all of those things.
That's beautiful. Thank you for knowing where I live, but not exactly telling everybody exactly. Sorry. But, you know, speaking of place, I went to Eva Beach Elementary. Did you too? Where did you?
No, I did not.
Okay, you went to one of the other schools. I was in Eva Beach, Evie. But please tell, this tattoo is beautiful. I remember one day, you know, it's telehealth. I seldom get to see you in person. I'm so glad to see you today physically. But when you showed up with it, it was so striking. And you folks, you can't see it, but I hope that you will show a little bit of it. It is beautiful. Please tell the story of it.
Absolutely. And again, to honor like my, to honor my kumu, in a sense, is this was actually a piece done by Kavika Ao, who is a traditional tatau artist, uhi artist in And this was an 𝖯리지PILi that was done in the traditional practice of uhi, or what you would maybe know as like the tap version of tattooing. And he and I had talked about, I had gotten my alaniho from him before, and alaniho is the one on your leg that also incorporates your family genealogy. But this we had done because I was starting my dissertation research. So I've become all but dissertation, if anyone remembers that or knows what that is. And it's a beautiful feeling, but then you're a little bit scared of like, oh gosh, what now? What do I do now? And starting this dissertation, a lot of those feelings of self-doubt, of anxiety, of imposter syndrome, all of these things started coming up, and I just thought, I don't know if I can do this. And he and I had talked story about really having a pale, or a protection for myself as I begin this practice of my dissertation and begin researching the mo'olelo, or the stories of mana from individuals, right? And so he created this piece for me that also gives me spiritual protection from those things that come into my body and mind, but also protecting me from the things that come out of it, right? So the things that I'm giving back to my community, that it's Pono, that it's that I'm living with integrity as well, with all of that knowledge I'm gaining. And so, and there's a piece on here that also pays homage to my practice, which is a peva. And a peva is probably one of my favorite pieces. But a peva is this small little piece of wood. When two pieces of wood are broken, this is the attaching piece of wood that brings it back together. And he had kind of gifted me that idea that I help put people back together. I help put families back together. I help put communities back together through these healing practices. And to me, it was probably the last time I felt like this entire exchange of mana from another person to myself, and it was a beautiful experience.
Wow. Again, chicken skin. Wow. Because you do family work. That is so beautiful. Can you show it? Is it?
Yeah,
can you see?
I think the
Oh, I
peva
see it.
is like
Yeah.
this small little pevas, you know, but they're so adorable. And I couldn't see what this was going to look like until after it was done. And so it was, again, just to also be so connected to somebody that I think also is a testament to his ability to be
He
Pono.
saw you.
And so there's just so much, you know, I'm studying this idea of mana exchange and how we exchange mana with others, with aina, with our akua, or our gods. And that day, there was just this tremendous mana exchange between me and Kavika and Chris Love, who was also he was also there to help the practice. But you could just feel like, you know, I had talked earlier about like my kupuna being there, and his mentors, his kumu, his kupuna, and his family being there as well. And so it was a beautiful process.
Thank you for sharing it, because I know it is personal, and you know, Kavika Ao is really an artist, truly, and so thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for sharing your time and your mana. It's beautiful. I'm so grateful to get to meet with you, you know, weekly on this part of our project and sharing our lives, this journey together, with you working towards some of your hours, and you get that PhD, you get that dissertation written. Let me know how I can help you. ABD means all classes are done, and now she just has to write the book.
Yes.
And it's a lot of work. You are not alone. You have ancestors and people here for you. So thank you so much, Emily Makahi.
Thank you so much.
Beautiful girl.
I absolutely loved our mana exchange at this moment too, and hopefully can create more in safe spaces.
Everybody's enchanted by you, by the way.
Everyone?
All my family. Oh, Emily. All the coffees love themselves in Emily. So thank you, folks, for showing up today at Bamboo and Tea.